Caleb Hunter had exactly $512 left when he walked into that frozen storage auction on the outskirts of Denver. At 40, the former Navy SEAL had watched his body ache, his savings vanish, and the life he once knew slip farther out of reach. Beneath him stood Atlas, his 5-year-old German shepherd, the only partner who had never left his side. The storage unit looked hopeless. Broken chairs, rotten wood, moldy boxes slumped in the cold like forgotten tombstones. Other bidders shook their heads and walked away. But when the auctioneer asked for bids, Caleb lifted his hand with the quiet desperation of a man who had run out of road. $480 later, he owned what looked like nothing more than a ruined pile of someone's abandoned past. But buried deep inside that darkness, something had been hidden with great care, and what Caleb found would change everything. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next miracle waiting for you tomorrow. Winter over Denver and the last chance, auction snow pushed across the Denver outskirts in long, frigid sheets that blurred the morning light and muted every sound. Caleb Hunter stood beside his aging pickup truck, letting the cold settle into his bones, as if he deserved it. At 40, he looked older on the days when the past pressed too hard on him, and this morning was one of those days. He was tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of build that once moved effortlessly through Navy SEAL obstacle courses, though life had softened the edges with exhaustion. His hair, once a deep chestnut, now carried threads of silver at the temples. He kept his beard trimmed short, not out of vanity, but because he hated the feeling of being unkempt. His eyes, dark brown and usually warm, had a sharpness when he was forced to calculate risks. That sharpness had carried him through night raids and blind swims. It failed him, however, in ordinary life. Civilian problems had no tactical map, no clean mission objective, only bills, injuries, and a sense that the world had kept spinning while he remained stuck in one moment years ago. His left knee stiffened again as he shifted weight. The ache flared like a memory, hot, sudden, reminding him of the blast that had taken 2 teammates and left him dragged into dust by the unit's medic. Some days he wondered why he was the one who lived. He'd stopped saying that aloud when people started answering, with hollow encouragements. Beside him sat Atlas. The German shepherd's posture was regal even in the biting wind. At 5 years old, Atlas was in his prime, muscular, alert, with a coat of rich black over his back and warm tan along his legs and face. His eyes, amber and intelligent, scanned the parking lot with the silent discipline of a trained service dog. The black harness on his torso read in bold white letters, "Service dog, do not pet." Atlas rarely barked. He communicated through stance, through the slight tilt of his head, through the way he pressed closer when Caleb's thoughts slipped into darker places. It was Atlas who had kept him grounded after discharge. Atlas who had paced beside him when nightmares left him gasping. Caleb lowered a gloved hand, brushing it against the dog's neck. "Easy, boy. Just another morning." He didn't add another morning we can't afford. Atlas didn't need to hear it. He felt it. Caleb checked his wallet. $512, that was all. All that remained after months of patchwork jobs, loading docks, night security, handyman repairs that paid too little and hurt too much. The rent was overdue. His knee medication was running out, and Atlas's food, the good kind that kept working dogs healthy, was almost gone. Desperation was not a feeling he admitted to, but he recognized its shape, which was why the storage unit auction felt less like an opportunity and more like a lifeline he had no choice but to grab. A small crowd had gathered, men in heavy jackets, a few women with clipboards, all wearing the quick, assessing expressions of people who flipped junk for profit. Caleb had none of their casual confidence. He kept to the edge, watching the auctioneer, a stout man in his 50s with a wind-burned face and a booming voice, bark instructions. A woman brushed past him, adjusting her beanie. She looked around 30, slight build, pale skin chapped by the cold. Her blonde hair peeked from beneath the knit cap, and her eyes darted over the units with a hunger that mirrored his own. She clutched a notebook full of scribbles, maybe a reseller, maybe a single mother scraping by. Either way, her determined jawline told Caleb she'd fight for anything that looked profitable. The auction moved quickly until they reached Unit B14. The metal door screeched upward, revealing a tomb of forgotten life, splintered chairs, a dresser sagging on broken feet, cardboard boxes slumped from water damage, a rusted floor lamp, and what might once have been a child's tricycle, now missing a wheel. The crowd hissed in disappointment. The blonde woman shook her head and stepped back. Another man, tall, bearded, wearing a camouflage jacket, laughed under his breath. "Not worth the gas to haul it." Caleb felt his stomach twist. He hadn't expected much, but he had hoped for something. A tool set, a small appliance, anything he could resell. But B14 was a graveyard. The auctioneer began the bid anyway. "All right, folks, starting at 50, who's in?" Silence. Atlas shifted, ears angling toward Caleb as if waiting for him to breathe. Caleb snapped upright. He didn't know what force lifted his hand. Hope? Fear? Instinct from years of committing to impossible missions? Maybe the simple truth that he had nowhere lower to fall. 50, he said. The camo jacket man snorted. "It's all junk, pal." Caleb didn't answer. He stood still, jaw tight. "Any other bids?" the auctioneer called over the wind. No one spoke. "Sold for 480. The number slammed into Caleb like a punch. He barely heard the blonde woman murmur, "Brave or foolish, I'm not sure which." When the auction ended, the crowd drifted to their trucks, boots crunching through snow. The vast lot fell quiet again. Only the wind remained, cutting, relentless, slipping through the seams of Caleb's navy coat and into the doubt beneath his ribs. Atlas pressed against his leg, steady and warm. Together, they stood before the rusted mouth of B14. Nothing inside seemed worth saving. Caleb exhaled, breath turning white in the air. "I don't know what comes next," he whispered, and for the first time in a very long time, he meant it. The clue behind the rotten wall, snow continued tapping softly against the metal shell of Unit B14 as Caleb Hunter knelt just inside the doorway, pulling on a pair of old work gloves. His breath fogged in the air, blending with the faint smell of mildew rising from the boxes scattered across the concrete floor. Behind him, Atlas stood steady, the dog's tail low, eyes sharp, taking in every corner as if the cluttered storage unit were a battlefield that needed clearing before nightfall. Caleb reached for the nearest box. The cardboard sagged under his fingers as though it were nothing more than damp paper pulp. Inside were mismatched dishes and broken kitchen tools, someone's forgotten life, reduced to fragments. He tried another box, clothes mottled with age, enough dust to thicken the air, a toy car missing wheels, nothing worth money, nothing worth the hope that had driven him to bid. The cold gnawed at his knee again. Atlas moved closer, nudging Caleb's elbow gently. The dog never pushed, never insisted, but his presence spoke clearly. "Don't give up yet." Caleb tried to smile at him. "You're still more optimistic than I am." He pushed deeper inside the unit, boots scraping against the cement. A toppled dresser leaned against the back wall like a wounded soldier. The drawers were swollen from moisture, but Caleb tugged them open one by one. Only moldy papers and stiffened socks. Then Atlas froze. His head snapped toward the far right corner. His ears rose, body rigid, muscles along his shoulders tightening with intent. Caleb recognized the stance instantly. It was the same posture Atlas had taken during patrol missions overseas. Silent alarm, threat detected, or at least something out of place. "What is it, boy?" Atlas stepped forward, nose lowered, sniffing with intense concentration. He halted at a wooden panel nailed to the wall. It looked like an amateur attempt at shelving, crooked, cheap plywood, no paint. But Atlas pressed his paw against it, then looked back at Caleb as if urging him to pay attention. Caleb crouched beside him. When he placed his hand on the panel, he felt it, a faint draft, a subtle vibration. The wood was newer than the wall around it. Wrong color, smoother texture. Suspicion flickered through him. He wedged the end of a rusted screwdriver beneath the board and pried. The first nail popped free with a whine. He pulled harder. The second gave way. Then the whole panel loosened and fell forward, revealing a narrow, shadowed cavity. Inside was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Caleb's heartbeat kicked. He reached in cautiously, fingers brushing rough fabric stiff from age. Pulling it into the light, he laid it across his knee. The cloth unfolded reluctantly, as though reluctant to surrender its contents. A small metal tin sat in the center, darkened with time. When he eased it open, the hinges creaked. Inside lay a worn leather pouch, and inside the pouch, he felt the weight, before he saw anything. Solid, cold, unmistakably metal. 9 silver coins spilled into his gloved hand. Large, heavy, each carved with symbols and text he didn't recognize at first. But then his mind clicked back to a briefing from years ago, an intelligence officer mentioning Spanish expeditions through the Rockies during the 18th century. He held one up. The edges were worn smooth by centuries, the crest still faintly visible. Atlas watched him, silent, patient, as if sensing the world had just shifted. Beneath the coins lay a folded sheet of parchment. Caleb lifted it carefully, fearing it might crumble. But despite its age, the parchment held firm. Intricate strokes of brown ink traced mountains and rivers, along with notations in Old Spanish. A map, not a decorative map like the kind sold in antique shops. This one looked practical, utilitarian, marked with symbols that meant something, perhaps waypoints, perhaps warnings. A tremor of unease threaded through Caleb's chest. Someone hid this deliberately. Someone had created a false wall just to protect it. He studied the hand-drawn terrain. A set of jagged peaks matched roughly with a part of Colorado he recognized, the southern stretch leading toward Pike National Forest. Who would hide something like this, he murmured. Atlas answered only with a soft whine, pressing close enough that Caleb felt the warmth of his fur through the gloves. The wind howled outside. Caleb stood, gripping the map, suddenly conscious of how exposed the open storage unit made him feel. He glanced toward the lot, deserted now, except for a man walking in the distance toward the auction office. The man was tall, wrapped in a heavy charcoal coat that nearly reached his boots. His face was sharp, angular, with a pointed gray beard, and eyes narrowed from a life squinting into harsh weather. He carried himself with a stiff sort of pride, shoulders squared, chin lifted. Maybe a rancher, maybe a small contractor drifting in for paperwork. But his gaze paused as he passed B14, just long enough to register interest. Caleb tensed instinctively. Something in the man's stare was too sharp, too calculating. The stranger gave a curt nod. Whether greeting or assessment, Caleb couldn't tell, then continued toward the office. Atlas stepped in front of him, tail stiff, body angled protectively. "Yeah, boy," Caleb whispered, eyes never leaving the stranger's fading silhouette. "I saw it too." He tucked the map and coins back into the pouch, then zipped it inside his coat. A strange mixture of adrenaline and dread swirled through him. He had come here expecting junk. Instead, he had found something valuable enough for someone to hide, something someone might be willing to come back for. And the thought left him colder than the winter wind outside the unit. Shadows that follow, the wind cut through downtown Denver like a sharpened blade when Caleb Hunter pushed open the door to the antique appraisal shop. Atlas trotted beside him, steps steady, harness catching the overhead light with each movement. The shop smelled of old wood and brass polish, a scent that carried the weight of centuries inside it. Behind the counter stood a man sorting through a stack of postcards. He looked to be in his mid-60s, with thinning silver hair tucked behind his ears and a neatly trimmed mustache the color of dusty snow. He had soft hazel eyes set behind round spectacles and hands that moved with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime handling fragile objects. His name tag read, "Martin Hale, Owner." Martin glanced up. His features brightened, but carefully. He had the air of someone who had learned long ago that strangers sometimes carried trouble through his door. "Morning," Martin said, voice low and steady. "What can I help you gentlemen with?" Caleb set the wrapped pouch on the counter. "I need an honest look at these. I'm not here to sell, just to understand." Martin unwrapped the coins slowly, reverently. When the first glimmer of old silver touched the light, his eyebrows rose. "Well now, these aren't the sort of trinkets folks usually bring in after clearing out attics." He lifted one coin closer to his glasses. Spanish colonial minting, late 18th century, very rare outside museum collections. Caleb felt his pulse quicken, though he kept his posture calm. "What about this?" He unfolded the map. Martin inhaled sharply. "Hand-drawn. Ink degradation is authentic. These markings." He traced a wrinkled finger over the symbols. "This resembles notations used by Spanish mule convoys during the northern expeditions. You may have stumbled onto something scholars have debated for decades." Caleb exchanged a glance with Atlas. The dog's amber eyes stayed fixed on every movement in the shop, ears turning toward the street, sounds beyond the window. Martin leaned closer. "But I'd be cautious. Every time rumors of lost Spanish silver make the rounds, certain individuals start crawling out of places most decent people avoid." The memory of the man in the charcoal coat from the storage lot flickered through Caleb's mind. His jaw tightened. "Appreciate the warning," he said. He paid Martin for the appraisal, wrapped the items again, and left the shop with Atlas close at his side. Outside, the cold slapped him in the face, harsher than before. The sky had begun to dim into that dull gray that promised a storm. The walk to his apartment took 15 minutes, but the tension made it feel longer. Caleb checked behind them twice. Atlas did too, subtle glances, ears twitching. Yet nothing followed, nothing obvious. Inside his building, the hallway lights buzzed faintly, flickering between yellow and orange. His apartment door sat, slightly ajar. Every instinct sharpened. Caleb signaled Atlas to stay low. One hand gripped the doorknob. He pushed the door open. His breath froze. Drawers yanked open, cushions slashed, papers strewn across the floor like they had been thrown in frustration. A warning, not a robbery. Atlas growled, deep and controlled, scanning every shadow. Caleb stepped inside, eyes sweeping each corner with the practiced precision of a soldier clearing a ruined safehouse. Nothing moved, no footsteps fled. Then he saw it. A folded sheet of printer paper sat neatly on the kitchen table, untouched by the chaos around it. He picked it up. The message was printed in bold, blocky letters. "Stop now, or you'll join the others who didn't." Caleb's chest tightened, not with fear, but with the grim acceptance of a familiar truth. Danger always finds him, whether on foreign soil or here beneath domestic ceilings. He locked the door, dragged a heavy chair beneath the knob, and looped a steel wire through the hinge to secure it further. When the room finally felt defensible, he set the map on the coffee table and knelt beside it. Hours slid by. Coffee went cold. His knee throbbed. Atlas lay with his chin on Caleb's boot, occasionally glancing up as if to check he hadn't drifted too far into the abyss of old memories. By midnight, Caleb's focus had narrowed to the map's cryptic symbols. The inked peaks and serpent-like rivers pointed consistently toward one region. Pike National Forest, a place he knew only through reputation. Rugged terrain, unpredictable weather, and plenty of places someone could vanish without leaving a trace. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. Why hide this? Why protect it so fiercely that someone would break into a stranger's home just to frighten him away? Atlas nudged him gently, sensing the shift in Caleb's pulse. Caleb stroked the dog's head. "I'm thinking it's not the silver they're scared of losing. It's whatever story comes with it." Outside, wind battered the window like a restless fist. Caleb took a long breath. More than the coins, more than the map, it was the violation of his space that sealed his decision. Someone wanted him afraid. Someone wanted him silent. He had been many things in his life. Soldier, protector, survivor. Fear had never been the thing that stopped him. He folded the map carefully and slipped it into his coat. "We're going," he said. Atlas rose immediately, muscles tightening with purpose. Caleb looked toward the dark window, his reflection fractured in the storm glass. He wasn't seeking treasure, he was seeking truth. And he knew, with the cold certainty of a man who had walked into danger before, that whatever lay ahead was bigger and darker than he had imagined. Deep snow, old marks, and the hunters in the dark. The forest swallowed sound as Caleb Hunter pushed deeper into Pike National Forest. Snow clung to the evergreen branches like thick white armor, bending them into solemn arches above the trail. The air was thin, sharp, the kind that filled the lungs with a cold burn. Atlas moved ahead, silent and sure-footed, despite the drifts rising nearly to his chest. His amber eyes scanned the tree line with disciplined vigilance. Caleb lifted the map again, its parchment stiff from the cold. The inked symbols matched the ridges around them, jagged peaks sketched centuries ago but still recognizable. A cross-shaped marking sat near a narrow canyon ahead. As he traced the symbol with a gloved finger, the wind shifted, bringing a low rumble from behind. Atlas stiffened instantly. Caleb sank into a crouch, his hand resting lightly on Atlas's harness. The dog leaned forward, muscles coiling. Then came the sound again, louder now. Engines, multiple. Caleb's pulse jumped. "Move," he whispered. They slipped between pines, heading toward an higher ground. Snow made every step slow and punishing, but Caleb's instincts guided him as surely as any compass. He found a ridge overlooking the canyon entrance just as the first vehicle tore into view. A black off-road truck skidded through the snow, chains rattling on its tires. Behind it came two more, headlights cutting harsh beams across the white wilderness. The lead truck's door swung open. A tall man stepped out, mid-40s, broad across the shoulders, with a shaved head that reflected the pale winter light. His jaw was square, covered with a short, graying beard that made him look older than he probably was. A long, jagged scar climbed from his collarbone to behind his ear, hinting at a violent past. His eyes were pale blue, cold and unblinking. Damian Cole. Caleb had seen his face in briefings years ago. Artifact smuggler, suspected of leading raids on remote archaeological sites. Never convicted, always vanished before authorities arrived. A ghost living behind 1,000 false identities. Damian surveyed the canyon with the entitled confidence of a man who believed the world owed him treasure. Two men stepped out behind him, burly, tattooed, armed, dressed in bulky winter coats that couldn't hide their predatory posture. "Spread out," Damian ordered, voice rough from cigarettes or countless nights yelling orders in dark places. "The map's close. I want it in my hands before the storm hits." The men obeyed immediately, as if fear, not loyalty, held them together. Caleb retreated from the ridge. He and Atlas moved quickly, weaving through rock formations and fallen logs. He needed to stay ahead of them, needed to reach the canyon first. They descended into a winding passage where snow funneled like drifting smoke. The walls rose on either side, marked by strange carvings, crosses, circles, and worn symbols. Caleb touched, one briefly. Centuries of weather had faded the edges, but the pattern matched the map. "This is the place," he breathed. Atlas pressed forward, nose low, tracking something beyond human senses. They reached a narrow opening almost hidden beneath a curtain of ice. Caleb peeled the ice aside, revealing a dark hollow behind it. A cave mouth, just large enough for a man and dog to slip through. Inside, the air held a damp chill. The floor dipped downward into a chamber where ice crystals glimmered faintly. Caleb brushed his flashlight across the space. A wooden chest lay half buried in frost. Its hinges rusted, iron bands warped by age. Carved into the lid was a faint emblem, a crown above a pair of swords. "Spanish military," Caleb whispered. He knelt and pushed the lid open. Inside, silver bars stacked like frozen pieces of moonlight. Beneath them, wrapped bundles of parchment and a tarnished bronze crucifix with intricate designs. The weight of history pressed against his chest. Atlas stood guard at the mouth of the cave, rigid as a statue. Then, from above, a voice cut the silence. "Step away from the chest, Hunter." Caleb's stomach dropped. Damian Cole stood on the ledge overlooking the chamber, gun leveled with practiced ease. Snow dusted his shoulders, melting into dark patches on his coat. Behind him, one of his men, a wiry, long-faced man with a scar on his cheek, held a flashlight trained directly on Caleb. Damian smiled, the scar on his neck tugging unevenly. "Knew you'd lead me right to it. Navy SEAL tracking skills, always useful when someone else does the work." Atlas positioned himself in front of Caleb, stance wide, silent, ready to explode into motion. "I'm not interested in your dog," Damian said flatly, "but I won't hesitate if you make this difficult. Hand me the map, now." Caleb didn't move. He measured the distance, the angles, counted seconds the way he had in firefights. Cold, precise. "You won't walk out of here with that chest," Caleb said. Damian's pale eyes hardened. "I've walked out of worse." The storm outside howled through the narrow tunnel, echoing like a warning. Caleb braced himself. Whatever happened next would decide whether he and Atlas survived the mountain, or became another set of ghosts swallowed by its snow. Light rising through the storm, snow hammered the mountains with a fury that turned the canyon mouth into a white blur. Caleb Hunter kept his back against the cave wall, body tense as Damian Cole's gun stared down at him like a black, unblinking eye. Atlas stood firm in front of him, every fiber of his muscular frame coiled and ready. Damian's finger tightened on the trigger, then a voice exploded across the ravine, amplified by speakers, sharp enough to slice the storm itself. "Federal Bureau of Investigation! Drop your weapons and step out with your hands visible!" The words boomed across the canyon, echoing between stone walls like thunder. Damian's head jerked toward the entrance, surprise flashing across his pale eyes. The gun wavered. Outside, lights swept through the snow, blue strobes cutting through the whiteout conditions. Dark shapes moved with disciplined precision, spreading across the canyon floor in tactical formation. Caleb exhaled once, steady and low. He had triggered his military-grade emergency beacon the moment he realized they were being followed, an encrypted survival transmitter he had carried since his last deployment. It was meant for downed operatives in hostile territory, but today, Pike National Forest counted, Damien cursed under his breath, a guttural sound full of rage rather than fear. "You brought the feds here?" Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. A line of armed agents advanced through the storm, snow crusted over their tactical gear. Leading them was a tall woman whose presence carried the authority of someone accustomed to crisis. Special Agent Sarah Whitmore, mid-30s, emerged from the blinding snow first. She had sharp cheekbones, warm brown skin, and dark hair braided tight against her head to keep it from whipping in the wind. Her eyes, intelligent, steady, swept the canyon with the focus of someone who trusted evidence more than luck. Years in the FBI's Art Theft and Antiquities Division had etched a cool determination into her face. She raised a megaphone again. "Damien Cole, drop the weapon and step back from the cave." Damien's hand twitched. For a moment, Caleb saw the calculation in the man's eyes. Fight or surrender. But the cold, the storm, the weight of federal rifles trained his direction. Even a reckless man recognized when he had been cornered. He lowered the gun. Atlas growled once, a low vibration rolling through the cave floor. Caleb placed a hand on the dog's harness to steady him. Two FBI agents moved in swiftly, disarming Damien and forcing his arms behind his back. His two associates were pulled from behind boulders, hands raised, expressions pale beneath wind-burned faces. The fight had drained out of them. Sarah stepped into the cave entrance, brushing snow from her jacket. She took in the old chest, the silver bars, the centuries-old artifacts, the carved walls, pieces of history that had slept untouched under ice and stone. Her voice softened. "You found the real thing." Caleb nodded, exhausted but steady, and almost didn't walk out. Sarah studied him briefly, as if evaluating what kind of man he was beneath the frost, the scars, the calm under pressure. "Your emergency beacon saved your life," she said, "and your report to dispatch will help preserve a cultural site of enormous historical value." Atlas walked toward her slowly, tail neutral. Sarah crouched, offering her gloved hand for him to sniff before gently scratching behind one ear. The dog's amber eyes softened for the first time all day. "Good boy," she whispered. By nightfall, federal teams secured the hidden chamber. Archaeological specialists were transported in by helicopter to catalog the find. The silver, manuscripts, crucifix, and chest were officially transferred into state custody under armed escort. Damien Cole and his men were flown to Denver for booking on charges ranging from attempted murder to trafficking in protected antiquities. For Caleb, the next days passed in a blur of interviews, statements, medical checks for Atlas, and a federal debrief. He expected them to confiscate everything, maybe even question his involvement. But instead, the state recognized him as the primary whistleblower who had preserved the artifacts from falling into criminal hands. A week later, an official from the Colorado Antiquities Board, a bespectacled older man named Dr. Leonard Marsh, with a gentle stoop and soft-spoken manner, met Caleb in a quiet office. He thanked Caleb in a trembling voice, explaining that the find would reshape regional history. Then he handed Caleb an award letter, a reward, large enough to clear debt, repair his knee properly, and rebuild a life he thought was beyond reach. "All this," Dr. Marsh said, voice warm, "because you chose to do the right thing." Caleb didn't know what to say. Back home in his small rental on the outskirts of Denver, Atlas received specialized veterinary treatment for his strained leg, paid in full by the state as gratitude for service in a historical preservation case. Within weeks, the dog ran almost flawlessly again, posture proud and strong. Winter softened. One dawn, snow drifting gently across the yard, Caleb stepped onto the wooden porch in his navy coat. Atlas bounded through the yard, kicking up white powder, barking at the sky with bright eyes. Caleb watched him, breath making silver clouds. He remembered standing outside storage unit B14, cold, broke, and lost. He remembered the weight of uncertainty pressing on him like heavy snow. Now he stood in a quiet home with a yard full of light, and a future no longer frozen. Sometimes the world hides its miracles in the coldest places: a forgotten storage unit, a winter storm, a man who had almost lost hope. Yet somewhere inside all that darkness, a small light waited, placed there long before Caleb ever stepped into B14. Some people call it luck, but Caleb knew better. He felt it in the quiet mornings on his porch, in Atlas's steady breath at his side, in the peace that settled over a heart that had once carried too many scars. What happened in those mountains wasn't just chance. It was the kind of guidance that only the Lord Himself can place before a wandering soul. And maybe, just maybe, He still sends signs to each of us, in kindness from strangers, in second chances we never saw coming, in the strength to keep going when we think we cannot take another step. If this story touched you, I invite you to share it with someone who might need a little light today. Leave a comment about where you're watching from and what blessings you are praying for this week. And if you haven't yet, remember to subscribe so these stories of hope and protection can keep finding their way to good people like you. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and keep your home warm this winter. And may He place a little miracle on your path just when you need it most.